So here I am, rereading specific chapters of Berserk, inspecting minute details in the artwork and dialogue to see if Mira left any clues to identify who is King Gaiseric. And then it hit me like a ton of bricks. The answer I had been seeking was under my nose this entire time. And once I explain my rationale, I think most of you will agree with me. To start this discussion, let's review the story Charlotte recounted in the Tower of Rebirth about King Gaiseric. Now we know Gaiseric created his own empire and eventually constructed a kingdom that spanned the entire continent. But the critical details of information that I want to hone in on are threefold. Number 1, Gaiseric loved battles. Number 2, Gaiseric was known as a demon king or a king of galloping death. And 3, he wore a menacing helmet shaped after a skull. So let's make a mental note of all these 3 characteristics of the famed Tyrant King as we investigate this mystery a little bit closer. One person of note who loves battle and is constantly searching for the strong is none other than Nosferatu Zod. Our first encounter with him is when Guts enters an empty castle after the hulking man just slaughtered numerous members of the Band of the Hawk. Upon first glance, if we compare the 2 images, both Zod and Gaiseric have black, spiky hair and are hulking in stature. Additionally, Gaiseric wears a helmet that is reminiscent of Zod's apostle form. Zod is also known as a demon, which would coincide with the second description of Gaiseric, a la his nickname as the Demon King. Okay, so mystery over, right? Zod was the famed Gaiseric. Well, not so fast. Let's keep digging a little further here. Now, when Charlotte was recounting Gaiseric's story, and she mentioned the skull-shaped helmet, Guts immediately thought of the Skull Knight. Keep in mind, however, Guts was not privy to the image that we saw as manga readers. He just had to go off of what he heard in Charlotte's story. However, as we all saw, the bottom half of Gaiseric's helmet does look an awful lot like Skull Knight. Furthermore, when Skull Knight saved Luca at the Tower of Rebirth, she thought the Knight of Skeleton was Death, which would coincide with Gaiseric's second moniker, the King of Galloping Death. Skull Knight has also been shown to love battle and throw himself headfirst into conflict. However, of the 2, only Skull Knight has been referred to by others as King. So while Zod has numerous similarities with Gaiseric, it would seem that Skull Knight is the best choice of the 2. But again, let's not be so hasty in our judgment. When we first encountered Zod, he told Guts of a prophecy that went as follows. "Death will pay you a visit, a death you can never escape." Now, if we parse Zod's words, we could claim that Death is referring to the Skull Knight, and how he'll visit him in the forest to forewarn the oncoming eclipse. We may further question how Zod knows this and why he's telling Guts this information. Aside from the speculative hypothesis that I just laid out, we should note that Zod does have insight into the future, or at the very least, insight into past events that are mirroring the future. Skull Knight also displays insight into future events and how they are mimicking the past. At the Tower of Conviction, he notes, "All the moves are parallel to that time." Notice how Zod walks in on the affair and Skull Knight prepares for battle. This is a reoccurring theme that happens time and time again with the 2 during critical moments with the God Hand. The next time Skull Knight mentions the karmic pattern of the past mimicking the present is at Flora's house. But she revises his statement by saying karma is not a circle, but a spiral. So while the situation may seem similar, the outcomes could differ drastically. For our purposes though, just keep in mind that the current timeline is similar to the past from 1,000 years ago. Shortly afterwards, Skull Knight and Zod meet outside Flora's house and have a pivotal conversation with one another. "Fighting was everything to you, wasn't it, immortal? Don't misunderstand. I'm the only one who can hold you off. It's that, and that alone. So this time, we both have different reasons than usual." Now think about this for a second. When Guts suppresses his inner beast of darkness, he is holding him off from releasing his malevolent energy. Now, if Zod is holding off Skull Knight at the mansion of the Spirit Tree, that means that Skull Knight was holding off Zod in the past, which means Zod was Skull Knight's inner beast of darkness.
Say it. Because we're the same person. That's right.
Take a moment to breathe that in, and then all of the dots will begin to click in your head. I mean, just think about this for 1 second. The fact that Gaiseric had 2 nicknames, one that coincides with Zod, and the other coinciding with the Skull Knight. The fact that both love battle. And then also consider that the construction of Gaiseric's helmet, with the bottom resembling the Skull Knight's and the top resembling Zod's apostle form, then you begin to realize they used to be the same person, with the Skull Knight being King Gaiseric and Zod being his inner beast of darkness. And eventually, something happened where those 2 personalities split off from each other, which is what could happen to Guts. He may eventually split off, with his ego going one way and his inner beast of darkness consuming his body. Just as Zod, the inner beast of Gaiseric, consumed the human body and turned it into a demonic beast. To substantiate these claims, observe Zod's look of surprise when he sees the Berserker armor. Afterwards, he looks over at Skull Knight and says, "Ah, the memories, my dear old rival." This indicates to me that much like Guts' inner beast of darkness, Skull Knight's beast of darkness, i.e. Zod, would clash with him constantly while wearing the armor, and would attempt to subsume him in darkness. But because of Flora's influence, who, as you could probably figure out by now, most likely played the role of Shirka for Guts, was able to temper the beast within. Unfortunately, due to the death of his lover, Gaiseric must have completely lost control of all his mental faculty and allowed his inner Zod, beast of darkness, to release its full potential. And here's the last piece of the puzzle. When Shirka enters Guts' psyche at the mansion of the Spirit Tree, she sees a faint light that is Guts' ego. It's likely Flora was able to do the same for Gaiseric. And when he allowed his vengeance to take hold of him completely, Flora must have separated Gaiseric's ego from his demonic spirit that would eventually become Nosferatu Zod. And she must have transported Gaiseric's ego, which became the Skull Knight, into the suit of armor that we see today. Of course, she most likely did this with the help of Hanar, who designed the armor, and Volvapa, who specializes in manipulating departed souls. And as a final piece of evidence to bolster my theory, when Guts was sitting alone in the forest after leaving the Band of the Hawk, and when he felt the presence of the Skull Knight, he mistook him for Zod. And when he sees Skull Knight's shadow under the moonlight, it resembles the eyes and the hair of Zod, or Gaiseric, even though Skull Knight has no hair to speak of at this point in time. And as a final little psychological piece of information, you guys know how I love Carl Jung. Well, just look at where the shadow is positioned over Guts. You see Guts, who is a human, positioned by the head of the Skull Knight shadow. It's almost like it's signifying that Guts still has an ego consciousness at this point. But eventually, in the future, his shadow will begin to envelop his body. And if he's not careful, he'll lose his ego consciousness to his inner shadow, his inner beast of darkness, which is exactly what happened to Skull Knight. And then as a final little bit of information, there's been a lot of speculation as to why Skull Knight will never kill Zod. He shows no restraint in terms of the other apostles. He just kills them in a flash. I mean, he murders and slaughters them, takes them down without equivocation. He's going after the God Hand completely and with complete resolve. Yet he will not kill Zod. Why is this? Well, if Zod did subsume his body if his own inner beast of darkness has his original body? Maybe Skull Knight simply cannot kill him because that's still a part of him in some way, and maybe if he does, his own ego consciousness will disappear. Or maybe he doesn't want to kill Zod because that's the only reminder to the Skull Knight that he used to be a human. And if he kills that, all that will be left is his ego consciousness and a suit of armor. So that's my theory, guys. I know it's a little bit crazy. I know no one's probably stated this before, but if you think about it, Guts and the Skull Knights are following the same path. They both wore the Berserker armor, which means Skull Knight must have had an inner beast of darkness at one point as well. And my theory is that Zod was that inner beast of darkness, and that they split off at one point, and that both of them technically were King Gaiseric when you look at all the clues. And if Guts is not careful, he will also split off as well. But here's the thing. Is there a connection between Guts and Skull Knight as well that we haven't considered?